Hi, welcome, Mindful Elevation viewers. Tonight we are going to have another interesting topic where we're going to be talking about imposter syndrome. May is the month of the mental health and the well-being. So, like we said before, this month we're going to pay attention to the different topics related to mental health. So, for tonight we have Mrs. Heather Ryder, and she's going to be talking with us about imposter syndrome. Good night. How are you doing?
Hi, nice to be with you here this evening.
Thank you, and thank you for your time spending with us to give us information.
Oh,
So
yes.
let me dive one time into it. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, just
Yeah,
briefly?
my name's Heather Ryder. I'm an anxiety coach and an imposter syndrome educator. I personally overcame high functioning anxiety and imposter syndrome while I was working in a really demanding tech job. And so I took that experience of moving past those things. And now I work with other really high achieving people who are tired of feeling the way that they feel and know that there must be something better for themselves. And so I help them get that.
Nice, nice, and thank you for the work you're doing because that's very important.
Oh, yeah.
Can you explain us what imposter syndrome is?
So, imposter syndrome is when you feel like an imposter. It's when you feel like you are faking it, you feel like you're a fraud and that you're going to be found out. So, it usually applies to work. It can apply to your like a creative pursuit or even parenting, but most often, imposter syndrome is related to the work environment. So, when you have imposter syndrome, you feel like other people know what they're doing, but you don't. You feel like you're faking it, like you're pretending to do what you're doing. It's almost like you are feel like you're in a movie that's your own life, like you're just an actor. And oftentimes, people, when they have imposter syndrome, it really affects their work life because they're afraid that they are going to possibly get demoted. They're afraid maybe they're going to get pulled off of a project or maybe even possibly get fired. So it's very debilitating, and it often is very like an emotional kind of place to be in that, kind of transcends into your personal life as well because it's sort of all consuming.
Mm, okay, and how actually does it start? How somebody can develop imposter syndrome?
I would say there's like sort of a short answer and then there's the deeper answer. Oftentimes, imposter syndrome sort of crops up for people when they try something new. So going back to, having a job, somebody might have a job and then they get a promotion and then they're doing something brand new. And so then all of a sudden imposter syndrome will start. Oh, that's one time that it definitely appears for a lot of people that I have definitely experienced in my own life, but also have seen with my clients and with people that I have talked to. So it's like they are, just kind of moving along, everything's great. And then they come into a new situation and this massive self doubt of imposter syndrome comes in. But the real answer about how somebody develops imposter syndrome is that if somebody is struggling with perfectionism, that's really what's underneath imposter syndrome. It's perfectionism, and they tend to have had perfectionism probably their whole life. Imposter syndrome is very, very common among high achievers. And so they're used to having, their work be really great. And it's usually because they are perfectionists. So they just keep going until everything is quote unquote perfect.
Okay, okay. Yeah, that is something that I can imagine when you want something to be done perfectly, it hampers you to continue indeed. So you can be a perfectionist and wanting to do everything perfect, and that can hamper you. What it is that we can do, let's say, to remedy that? because being perfectionist is something that doesn't start from today to tomorrow. It's a long process from what I'm understanding.
Right. So if somebody is struggling with imposter syndrome, there's a number of things that they can do. So the first thing is that someone has to recognize when they're having imposter syndrome based thoughts. So when we all have self dialogue come in, and we have about 6,000 thoughts a day that we think. So a lot of them, and a lot of them are nothing, right? It's just like, what do I want for lunch sort of thing. But with imposter syndrome, there are these, sort of dialogue phrases that are coming in that are very critical to oneself. And so one of the first steps to beating imposter syndrome is starting to recognize those thoughts, which actually is harder than it sounds, because like I said, we have 6,000 thoughts and they come in and out of our heads very quickly. And so oftentimes we're not noticing them at all. And so if somebody is really struggling with imposter syndrome, they have to be willing to slow down and notice their thoughts and pay attention to them so that they can recognize when they're having self-defeating thoughts come in. So that's really important. When somebody is struggling with imposter syndrome, as I mentioned, it's common among high achievers. And so if someone has imposter syndrome, they're probably actually very accomplished. So when they come up against something new, and that's making the imposter syndrome really escalate, what they can do is look for evidence of past success. It's like, okay, I did this in the past and I was successful. So number one, that's proof that I can be successful again, but also someone can take sort of that learning from the past and think, well, how did I succeed at that thing before? I started somewhere with that before. How can I apply that strategy to what I am doing now? So that's two ways. And then a third way is that imposter syndrome, people kind of want to make this huge quantum leap from wherever they are to where they think they should be. But that's too much of a gap. So what someone with imposter syndrome needs to do is take this sort of I'll learn as I go mentality, or have this just in time learning philosophy. Like, I can't know everything all at once. So I'm not going to try to do that. I'm going to figure out what I need to learn in this moment to get me to the next step. And then I'm going to focus on learning that thing. And I'll know that that is going to help me progress to where I need to be.
Okay. So then, the last one that you said about learning while you're going, I didn't understand it. If that is part of being a perfectionist and the imposter syndrome, or that is one, let me call it a tool that you can use for going about this imposter.
All three of those were tools that I was giving to combat imposter syndrome.
Okay, that sounds good. And then let's say me from the outside, how can I know if somebody is suffering from imposter syndrome?
Well, that's a really great question, because you may not know at all, because people tend to sort of hide this thing, and it may not be apparent that someone is doing or not doing something because of imposter syndrome. But let's say you're talking about perhaps your coworker, or if somebody is watching and they happen to manage someone. One of the sort of symptoms of imposter syndrome is that because someone has this massive self-doubt, they are not likely to share their ideas or to speak up in meetings. So if you're working with someone or managing someone who tends to not talk in meetings, is just very quiet, doesn't share their ideas, doesn't, if somebody else gives an idea and they aren't sort of going back and forth with, because not every idea is great, right? But in a normal work environment, you're all sort of like working together and figure things out, and there's a dialogue back and forth. And so if there's somebody who persistently does not engage in that, that might be an indicator that they have imposter syndrome. It may not, as I mentioned, like perhaps they're just very quiet and very shy, and it's not that they have imposter syndrome, but that is something to look for as well. And I'm trying to think of some other, if there's somebody that you work with that is one of those people who is always trying to get new certifications, like they just are constantly taking trainings, they're constantly trying to have new certifications, that can be a sign of imposter syndrome as well, because they think, oh, I'm faking it and I don't know what I'm doing. So the only way to know what I'm doing is to get more training, right? And it's like try to prove to themselves and prove to other people that they are worthy. So if you know somebody who is constantly taking classes or something like that, that may also be an indicator that they have imposter syndrome.
Okay. And then how will I be able to address someone like that? Or is it something that I can address or have to address? Let's say if in a work environment.
Do you mean if you're their coworker or if you're their manager?
Is there a difference?
Well, if you're their manager, you definitely should help address the issue, because if somebody has imposter syndrome, then that means you're not, as a manager, you're not getting the best version of your employee because they doubt themselves. So they're not sharing in meetings. They're not, they're not going after their creative pursuits. They're not sharing their ideas because they doubt their ideas. So if you are a manager of somebody, you definitely should help the person as best as possible. And I mean, I guess this is sort of a philosophical question that you just asked, is like, if somebody that you work with has imposter syndrome and you're their colleague, should you do something about it or not? I don't know the answer to that. I guess, and it depends on your relationship with them and how close you are with them.
Okay. So then you that have the practice, and then you said you help people as well with the imposter syndrome. So how it does look like if we have to think about you coaching them?
Yeah. Are you asking? I guess I don't know what you're asking for sure.
Because you said in your practice you just work with people that have imposter syndrome as well. So in a case like that, if you have a client that has or suffer from imposter syndrome, how you just coach them?
So there are two ways that I work with people who have imposter syndrome. One is through one-on-one coaching. And then I also have a group program that's called You Are Enough: From Imposter to Empowered in 6 weeks. So there's two options for people. But either direction somebody wants to take, I work on the root causes of why somebody is feeling the way they feel. And this is true for my anxiety clients as well. So, I mean, I've already sort of, hinted and alluded to the fact that there's perfectionism going on. That perfectionism came from somewhere. The imposter syndrome comes from somewhere. And these are usually based in things that have happened in someone's past, because we all have past experiences that shape who we are today and shape how we respond to the world. And those are sort of like limiting beliefs, subconscious programming. And so the work that I do gets at that core level reason that people are feeling the way that they're feeling. So while I give people tools and techniques, that's that's great to have. But the thing that I'm actually working on with people is the underlying reason that they feel the way that they do. And we shift them at a core base level. So then they change from that place. So they basically have a transformation, which is insanely amazing when that happens for them.
Okay. And then I assuming that when a client comes by you is because they are the one open to want the coaching or the therapy. But you saying you have a program that is 6 weeks if they're doing it in a group, from what I'm understanding. And do you see positive results from everybody that participating in the group session, or some might need a little bit longer than 6 weeks? Because since you're saying that you're going to the root of the problem and not only about what is happening at this moment, so I can imagine that people might have different time frames of how to be able to manage the root problem.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, when anybody comes and is working with a professional for an end result like I provide, everybody's at different stages, right? And so it's like somebody may be further along than another person, and that's all great. I mean, people are where they are. So I would say that everyone who goes through my programs notices that they feel different at the end. But the work that we do, because it's transformational, it doesn't take place only during the 6 weeks. So they notice changes and continue the changes after, because if you think about it, of like peeling away layers of an onion, you're like peeling away the stuff that's been there for a long time. And so as those layers sort of drop away, they continue to drop away after a program. And this is true for, working with a one-on-one client as well, right? I mean, people can have like a popcorn sort of pop that happens after something's over because of the work that they did when they're working with me or someone else, right?
Okay. And then is this actually a mental health challenge?
It is a mental health challenge. Yeah, it's imposter syndrome isn't a disorder. It's more like a phenomenon. But oftentimes with imposter syndrome, and this happened for me when I had it, people will go into a disassociated state. So when somebody is in a traumatic response, to keep themselves feeling safe, it's like they pull themselves out of their body. That's called disassociation. And so when I experienced imposter syndrome, that happened for me. And I've had my clients have described that as well. I describe it as feeling like I was in a movie while I was at work. Other people describe it as having an out-of-body experience. I've heard multiple people say that. So that kind of lets you know the severity of how somebody is feeling, right, when they're experiencing this. And that's why I like to tell people imposter syndrome is not just feeling underconfident or having low self-esteem. This is a really big deal when somebody is experiencing it. It's very pervasive in how they feel and how it affects their life.
Okay. Yes, because indeed I was going to ask that if once in a while I'm feeling that the knowledge, for example, that I have, it's not worthy to be shared, if I can categorize that as imposter as well. But you explain me that it has to be something continuously, and it's more like, you gave the example, more out of body experience, or it's something that really, let's say, hampering you for doing your job.
Right. Yeah, that question that you just asked, it's hard to gauge because somebody could have some doubt about what they're doing. That's totally normal, right? That happens every day. I think it's like in terms of severity, like if somebody to rate that on a scale of 1 to 10, that sort of question you asked, if it's making somebody feel, I don't remember exactly how you phrased it, but let's say it's like a 1 or a 2, maybe a 3 on the scale, like they're questioning how they're doing, but it's like, if I had to rate this, they'd rate it really low. But when somebody has imposter syndrome, if you gave them rate this on a scale of 1 to 10, they'd probably say something like 11, they would rate it like way past that because it's so overwhelming and all consuming.
Okay, I understand. What is one, if people that might be suffering from imposter syndrome are listening, what can be one tip that you can give to them?
Yeah, so there were those 3 tips that I gave earlier. So for those who are watching, definitely go back and watch those again, because those were the first 3 that I always tell everyone, because you can't make any progress if you're not recognizing the thoughts that are coming into your head. I mean, it's really difficult to move past anything if you don't sort of have that level of self-awareness, right? So, I mean, that's why I always mention that that's really key. But I guess to take that a little bit further right now for people is that when you recognize those self-critical and self-defeating thoughts that come in, like the imposter syndrome is talking to you, when you recognize that, the next step is that you can reframe the thought into something more valuable and more helpful to yourself. So if the imposter is saying something like, oh my, you don't know what you're doing, you're totally going to screw this up, you have no idea what you're doing, the reframe for that again would be something like, okay, I know I feel like I don't know what I'm doing right now, but where do I start? Because I have started new things successfully in the past. So how can I start this new thing right now? So it's like acknowledging, okay, yeah, I've never done this before. Like there's an acknowledgement in that, but then it's also like, okay, but what do I need to do right now? So instead of getting frozen and just being like, oh my God, I don't know what I'm doing. It's like, okay, I hear you voice, you're saying you don't know what you're doing, you're going to fail. But then how can you shift that into something that's more positive for you? So you take every one of those sort of imposter syndrome phrases and then you reframe it into something that's believable and helpful.
Okay, okay, that sounds interesting. Which are the age group that you're getting the most in your practice when it comes to the imposter syndrome?
So my client base tends to be there anywhere from early 30s into their early 50s.
Okay, okay. Do you think it has to do with the technologies from nowadays that you have the internet, all kind of information? Do you think that has an impact on it too?
I don't think that. I think this is a pretty fundamental thing of people really feeling it's not about technology. It's probably about the society that we live in. And in the United States, I mean, this is a very successful country, right? And so
Mhm.
there's very much an effort on being an achiever here. And in the United States, there a lot of times one's like identity is sort of tied up in their job. It's like your worth comes from your job. So
Yeah.
I think that that's what the systemic sort of problem is. But this existed before the technology that we have today. I mean, this has been around for I don't know how long, but the first sort of research that I've heard about is this was first identified in the 70s.
Okay. 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 That's now. I know that you said that it has to do with it can have or traumas in the past can have an impact on if you develop imposter syndrome or not, if understood you correctly. And I know that there can be different type of traumas and everything. But then as a parent, what can a parent do for their child? I mean, yeah, it's a kind of like a difficult question to ask because of the trauma aspect, but then still as a parent, because of the type of thoughts that you might have, let's say as a grown up, what can a parent do for a child to have less risk of developing imposter syndrome
Right.
if
So,
it's something
yeah,
like
I
that?
know where you're going with this. So this isn't even just about imposter syndrome. This is about good parenting, and because if there's a lack of focus, then this can turn into all sorts of different, mental stuff going on. But parents can, when they're talking to their children, praise them for their effort. It's not about the end product that they put out. It's about
Mm-hmm.
like, oh wow, you put a lot of time into that piece of art that you put together, right? Or I could see that you were really taking your time. It's not just like, oh, I love that end result thing that you created. It's much more about like acknowledging the effort that somebody put into it. That's what's
Mm-hmm.
valuable.
Okay. And then, because you, of course, you work in the States and your clients are from the States as well. Here in the Caribbean, the imposter syndrome, like I told you the first time, it's something that not even me heard about it actually. And now you're telling me it's something from already in the 70s. So in the Caribbean now, and talking to you, I can already foresee some of the children that I have been working with in the school context, that there might be something there. But then, since it's not something known here in the Caribbean, how we can go about that actually?
Yeah, and just to clarify, I work with people from all over the world, by the way, not just the United States. So I've worked with clients from outside of the United States. Even though someone doesn't know what imposter syndrome is called, it still exists, even if you don't have a name for it, right?
Yeah.
And that's
Mm-hmm.
what was happening for me when I had imposter syndrome. This was probably about maybe 7 or 8 years ago. I had never heard of
Mm-hmm.
imposter syndrome. It's becoming much more well known in the United States as a phrase. Like if I had said
Mm-hmm.
imposter syndrome to somebody 70 years ago, they would have been like, "What are you talking about?" But now
Yeah.
people know about it. It has a name. But if I mean, I don't know really fully how to answer you because this is, I think, in a lot of ways cultural. And that's why I brought the conversation into the United States. I don't know what it's like for you where you live. I know in the
Mm-hmm.
United States and other countries that it really is a focus on the career, and success means you have a good job or you have a great business, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't, and that's not the case everywhere else. I mean, there's a lot of other
Correct.
European countries that have a much better work-life balance than the United States. Like United States,
Mm-hmm.
it's all about work here. So, I mean, I guess that's sort of a question for you because I'm not familiar with the Caribbean and what sort of the culture is like there in terms of work. So I don't know how pervasive imposter syndrome is where you're living.
Okay. 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 So then, even if I would want to bring that conversation in the Caribbean, I'm understanding that just start a conversation and then kind of like see where and how I reach based on the culture that I'm living in.
Yeah, I mean, it's always about starting a conversation, right? And just
Mhm.
opening up a dialogue about something. And so, if you think this is happening where you're living, based on some of the things I said, then I think that it is great to just start conversations with people. And it can be as something as simple as like, hey, I met this woman and she is, like helps people with imposter syndrome. Have you heard about it? And then once you describe it, even if people have never heard of it, then that's when you might start to find out that people have actually experienced it before, but nobody's been talking about it.
Yeah, correct. Because that is one of the things that, especially here in the Caribbean, we don't talk about a lot of things, and especially when it comes to the mental health and our well-being, those are things that we barely address. And even in, let's say, your group, you don't talk about things that happening in your house, or maybe that you're suffering from something. Our culture is we keep it in the house. And so yeah, and that's why indeed when you said about imposter syndrome, I thought, okay, this might be something indeed that we can bring awareness about it as well, because like everything else, there's might be people suffering from it, and then we don't even know about it and not even know how to coach them, or give them therapy about it. So that
Yeah,
is,
I mean, I
yeah.
guess that is an obstacle to overcome. And I do feel really fortunate that in the United States, mental health conversation is becoming very normalized now, right? Because a number of years ago, people didn't talk about it here. If you did go to see a psychologist or a therapist, you wouldn't tell that to people. You would keep that a secret, right? And a lot of people
Exactly.
wouldn't have gone to see someone because they would think, well, that means I'm crazy, right? And so now it's so common here to have a therapist. It's just like saying, like, you're going to get your hair cut. Like, I'm going to see my therapist. So it's
Yeah.
very common here. And that I think lets other places know it can happen very quickly. I mean, really within a span of 10 or 20 years, it can become very
Mhm.
normalized. And it is becoming very normalized here to even talk about mental wellness and mental health within a work environment, because it used to be like, oh, there's work and then there's your personal life. But
Mhm.
now companies are realizing that just like, giving their employees health insurance so they can take care of their physical bodies, that they need to help their employees take care of their mental wellness as well, because that's just as important.
Yeah, correct. Correct. That is so true. And someone is commenting that indeed they need to talk more about this with me. one of the people I know that lives in the Caribbean. But yes, indeed, it's like you said, the conversation is very important, and yeah, unfortunately, it's not something that we regularly talk about this. But like I said, we have to continue with the conversation and continue to try to bring awareness about the imposter syndrome, but also about all that have to do with mental health. And I like the phrase that you use, that in the same as they say they go into do their hair, they go into the therapist too, as that it is something normal at this day and age. So
Yeah.
that is so true. Um, is there something, because today we're going to be here for 30 minutes and not the 1 hour that we normally does be. But before we start closing it off, is there something that you want to tell us what is important maybe when it comes to imposter syndrome, the mental health, the connection between the two, why you find it important?
Yeah, I just really feel like it's, everyone's right to feel really amazing in their lives. And so I love to let people know if someone's really struggling with some sort of mental health issue, which, as we've mentioned, imposter syndrome is one of those things. There is a way out. There's a way to feel better. And it just takes a bit of commitment, but
Mhm.
it's worth the effort. And I think a lot of times people feel really trapped and feel like, oh, I don't know if this is ever going to change for me. But I'm living proof, and my clients are living proof that you absolutely can change your life and feel really amazing.
Yeah, that is so true that they can empower themselves with some coaching and then therapy indeed, and then to see the light at the end of the tunnel, as we does say it over here. And that is not something that they have to stay in, and there's no way out, like you said. And so, well, thank you. It has been short but sweet, and I appreciate your time that you shared the information with us. For me, it was interesting to get some more information about imposter syndrome, and it makes me even more aware to continue bringing out these type of topics to the public to make it a little bit more common to be able to talk about it. I find that very important.
Yeah, you're
So.
absolutely welcome. I hope that I was able to, yeah, share some really interesting information with people, and that if someone is, watching and they're feeling that way, just know that there are things that they can do, and they can move past it.
Yes, thank you. Thank you as well, Mindful Elevation viewers. So this week was about imposter syndrome, and we will continue every week of bringing an information related to mental health. Heather Ryder, thank you so much for your time, and I wish you a very good weekend. And thank you.
Hey, everybody.
Bye.